The ninth season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Sunday at 5 p.m.
Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news. Once again, from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to UNO. 45 years ago this year, the Peace Corps was started, and it was conceived by, as most people know, then Senator John F. Kennedy. It came into reality when he was elected president. But there is someone, my first guest of the show today, we have two guests, is Tom Gutierrez, who is the Dean of International Studies and Programs. He is also head and founder of the Center for Afghan Studies here at UNO, and which is how he got into all of this, was the Peace Corps. But
right.
you can take us actually back to the first speech that the president made.
Yes,
when he was senator. I mean, this
which says something about my own age, but you're right. I can do that. It was he made his famous Peace Corps speech when he was on the campaign trail in 1960, running against Richard Nixon, and he did that at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, which is about 45 miles up a highway from my hometown in Maumee, Ohio. And then after that particular speech there, he came to my hometown in Maumee, Ohio, and repeated some of that, again calling for a national Peace Corps, which would be a way to send American young youth abroad to work in developing the world and to contribute to the kind of maturing of these newly independent nations that were springing up everywhere, becoming independent after they were cut off or finally released by their imperial masters. So, and I think the very first group that went out in 1961, and they went to Ghana. I know that. So that was how it was. So I went a little later, a couple years later. And
you did not go alone?
No, I didn't go alone. My wife and I had been following the development of the Peace Corps together, and so we had applied as an engaged couple, and eventually we married and then went to Afghanistan shortly thereafter. And so it was and there were many married couples who went into the Peace Corps. There were about 4 or 5 such couples in our group, and it was a way to do something different than what most people were doing after you graduated from college. Everybody was, that I knew was taking a job with this company or that company. In that area, it was usually Ford or General Motors or Westinghouse or something like that. And I wasn't really enthused about doing that at the time, and so how could we resist the 11 cents an hour that the Peace Corps paid, which is really a magnificent sum. And off we went, and it was very significant for me in many ways. First, it was my very first airplane flight ever. I went to Afghanistan. And it was also my very first foreign country of any kind. And that was, significant kind of thing. It had a lot of impact on my life. I majored in history and foreign languages, worked in my father's pastry shop, became a master pastry chef, and really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to go abroad sometime. I was never able to do so in college, and here this Peace Corps thing was, and that made it possible for me to go abroad and to do something that I'll never forget. It is unquestionably the most important decision that I ever took, and of course it's had everything to do with my career thereafter.
Absolutely. Now, what you and your wife did over there, was that similar to what was happening in other countries, or was it different in every country at that time?
Well, I wasn't in other countries, but yes, I think
But you've talked to a few people.
The basic plan was Most people taught English as a second language or did other things. I taught English as a second language, and my wife worked in business education. And then I also coached, as you know, the Afghan national basketball team. And so I coached basketball, taught English as a second language. I enjoyed both. They both, each of those two responsibilities put me into contact with the youth of Afghanistan, and they are always more spontaneous than the adults. So in some ways you can learn things from them you can't learn from others. A lot of it had to do with language. I learned a lot of language from the youth that I might not have learned from a more polite society. And that was fun. I learned a lot of slang, a lot of phrases one could throw out and understand when somebody else threw them similar kind of phrases at you, how to respond. So that was a good part of it. But it was just a great way to meet lots of Afghans. You met all these students, all these players. You met a lot of their families, and it just enriched the whole experience.
Now, in terms of the mission of the Peace Corps, which there are it's threefold, as I understand it: helping people of interested companies meeting their needs for trained men and women, to give some education, helping promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of the people served, and helping promote a better understanding of other peoples on the part of all Americans. Do you think that, knowing your experience and talking to others, that mission was fulfilled?
Well, I think so. I never really thought of it so much in those terms. I thought of it in some other terms which I think kind of fit into that. First of all, I've always been able to say with a great degree of confidence that if the Afghans got 10% of my experience there, if they got that in return, they got an awful lot, because I got so much out of it myself. I also remember the Peace Corps as that place where I learned more about the United States than I ever learned before.
How so?
You learn more about your own country if you can compare it with something else in depth, and you gain a certain amount of depth if you stay in a country and you work at the levels with the peoples that we did. And so, comparative education is the purest form of education, and I really learned an awful lot about the United States while I was learning about another country. I learned that I appreciated my country even more than I thought I might have or had or whatever. But I also learned things that were in another society that I thought were worth taking home. Particularly the way Afghans treated their family members, their elderly. There was more of a long-term family association. We in America tend to become more independent as we get older. We want to move out of our families' homes, and we go out on our own. And there's a certain good thing to be able to say for that. But in Afghanistan, it's not done that way for the most part, and there are certain benefits about keeping the close-knit family around. And I think, we've had some of that in our own history in the past in the United States, and we changed as we modernized. That was a good thing as well. Coming back, my whole life has been a part of the third goal since I've come back to the United States. I was not the founder, by the way, of the Center for Afghanistan.
I'm sorry.
There was another person and a group of people, but unfortunately the founder died, and I was recruited to come here in '74, and so my whole career afterwards has been dedicated to this third goal, and that is to help Americans learn about the rest of the world. I hope they're learning something through this experience.
Now you've had the unique experience of watching the country that you came to love, sort of your brothers and sisters over there go through tremendous turmoil afterwards. The Russians in Afghanistan, and I won't say it right, the Mujahideen.
You said it right.
Fighting back and trying to regain it. Then, of course, the whole thing with the Taliban. And you were able to keep some contact at varying times
Yes, I was not able to go into Afghanistan during the time of the Soviet Union, of course, but and did not. But I did go into Afghanistan during the time of the Taliban because I was working then on a UN mission. I was took leave from UNO for a period of time, 96 and 97, to do that. And the only thing I can say about all of that experience that Afghanistan had after we left Afghanistan is it's sad, because there will never be that Afghanistan which we knew before, which was a great place for us to be in. Our eldest son was born there to us, and we just had so many great friends, many of those who lost their lives or were eventually lost to Afghanistan and the brain drain that followed such turmoil. And now the Afghans are trying to rebuild under President Karzai, who has visited us here. And what, he and his compatriots are trying to do is very, very difficult. The United States is helping. Its contributions are mixed in terms of quality and consistency, and you just keep seeing Afghans struggling still. It's still a nation at risk after going through 30 years of destruction through the Soviets and the civil war with the Taliban, etc. And so it's a place that I'm pleased now to see has emerged from Soviet occupation and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda occupation, but that's a source of some pleasure, but it's still one where I see it's unlikely to be able to capitalize on some of its great resources of the past. One thing, for example, Carol, is those great Buddhas that the Taliban destroyed. Those cannot be rebuilt or regained, and they were really major tourist attractions. Afghanistan doesn't have those now, even for the future, no matter how good it gets. And but more importantly, obviously, is the loss of the really interesting and intelligent and able Afghans who were, lost to the country through the brain drain. And that's why I kept wanting to go back. Because I liked the people. I mean, the history was great, the mountains were super, the weather was good, was near India, near the Middle East. You could travel around, enjoy that benefit, but it was to be able to go back and be with the people. And of course, for me, be able to coach basketball all those years.
Absolutely.
And I liked that. I coached all those 10 years. It was a lot of fun.
There have been over 182,000 Peace Corps volunteers, and they've served in, I think, about 100.5 countries. Now they're down to currently about 75. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it's changed to a lot of degrees. They're working with HIV, AIDS, information technology, which wasn't an issue when you were there. Do you hear that it's changed? Is it still intrinsically the same?
Well, one hears of the changes, no doubt about it, but I have a lot of our students who major in international studies and in other fields here at UNO who report back to me and to others about their Peace Corps experience. And they go to different countries now, countries that didn't exist when I was
East
in the Peace
Timor.
Corps. Yeah, right. Or, for example, Uzbekistan. It was a republic in the Soviet Union. Now it's a newly independent country. And they go to, Uzbekistan, or they go to Kazakhstan, or they go to Moldova, or they go to Lithuania, Latvia, whatever. And so there are those differences. But in the end, they're still doing essentially the same thing. They're contributing to a need in a particular country, whether it's teaching English as a second language like they used to do, whether it's coaching sports, which some are doing, or whether it is working in areas that have to do with information technology. Whatever those areas are, the basic concept remains. And again, the people who go get such a great deal out of their experience. Then they come back and they can engage in the goal, the third goal, or they can,
Educate Americans.
Americans, or they can, draw upon this for the rest of their lives. And you do that. I mean, if you're a Peace Corps volunteer, you'll never forget it. It's as significant an experience, I think, to those who make that choice as that type of experience was for those who served in the Second World War as part of the greatest, generation. That is something that nobody forgets who was involved in that, and nobody forgets the Peace Corps.
One quick question. There are many Americans who are concerned about the perception of Americans abroad. And it's still then the same Peace Corps that was a people-to-people kind of thing. Is it as important as ever?
No question about it. In fact, it's more important now than it ever was. And it's unfortunate that we don't invest more money in it because it's the best money we can spend. It costs so little to underwrite international educational exchanges in terms of the total dollars. So far, smaller an amount than, putting money into war. And the impact, though, that people-to-people exchanges has is the best weapon we have in terms of helping people understand our values. People get U.S. values by watching MTV or satellite TV. They watch Baywatch or Britney Spears or something. That's a part of our value system, but we have far more that people need to be aware of, and it doesn't always get translated over MTV. So
Absolutely.
People do a better job. Another way to do it, of course, is to have people come here and study at universities in the United States, and that's a big help. So international educational exchange. Peace Corps provides for that. Fulbright provides for that. Study abroad programs provide for that. Americans serve as ambassadors, and that's the best thing that we can do for American interests and having people understand us.
Well, I think you've just done that to one degree or another here. Thank you so much. We will be talking to you, I'm sure, in the future, and we will take a break here and check in with our next guest. Stay with us.
Great. So we should do one final famous
Afghanistan.
international.
Welcome back to Consider This. The second half of the show, my guest, I'm pleased to have Steve Rothy with us. He is with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and his experience was, I think, I guess if you look up and down, you were in the same hemisphere as Afghanistan.
Yes, I was.
But you served in Kenya.
In Kenya, right around the equator. So.
And what years? We know that Tom was a few years after the whole thing started.
Right. No, I was 15 years or so after the Peace Corps was started. In 1976, I went to Kenya, and I served until 1978. That's the standard tour of duty for a Peace Corps volunteer.
It's like 27 months, I believe, by the time you get the training.
I think, yes. I think they've added more training in recent years. When I went, we had 2 weeks of in-country training, and then we were off to our posts. And we came back after a few months for some more training, and were sent back to our posts again. We did that a couple times. So.
What did you do over there?
Well, I taught biology to high school and junior college age kids in a boys' boarding school. We were out in the bush, as we call it, out in the rural area.
So when they talk about the bush, you have an idea of what that is.
Yeah, I know where the bush is, yeah. But it's populated. Where I lived was a fairly populated area of Kenya. Kids came from miles and miles to stay in this school, in a boarding school for months at a time and study, and they were all boys. And then umpteen miles down the road might have been a girls' boarding school. And they followed the British educational calendar, 3 months on, 1 month off, and that sort of thing. And the educational system there is like the British in that they go for an exam at the end of 4 years, their Form 4 exam. And at the end of 2 more years, they can go for their O-level or their A-level exams. And so education is taken very, very seriously there, all in preparation for taking those exams. It's thought that if they can do well on those exams, they'll have a better chance at employment and better economic opportunities.
Now, what drew you into the Peace Corps mystique at that? And there was a lot more mystique. And there are people today that don't even know it exists anymore.
Yeah, I know. People say, well, is that still around? I said, well, yes, it's around, but it doesn't seem to have the visibility. I suppose when it was created, it had more high profile. It certainly had some high profile advocates at the time, with President Kennedy and Sarge Shriver. But it's been around and basically consistently, well, steady or slowly growing ever since. I guess the mystique of Peace Corps, well, just the name, Peace Corps, it's pretty catchy. And I thought, what a cool idea to be able to go overseas, serve in third world countries, help them, learn something, pursue your passion to do something good in the broader world. And but I didn't go in the Peace Corps without having been overseas already. I went after I had been to Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda, East Africa, on a college tour. I was lucky enough to go on a course through East Africa when I was in college, undergrad. And my eyes were opened so that I was hooked. I had to go back. I knew I wanted to go back. I figured the Peace Corps was the best way to do that, and because it was our government reaching out and becoming involved in those countries in a well-intentioned way. And I put my application in, and I went to graduate school, and while I was in graduate school, lo and behold, they had some openings in Kenya, which I didn't learn about until my graduate professor said, "Did you know there's a recruiter over in the Union building?" I said, "No." So I went over and I talked to the recruiter, and she said, "Well, you know, we've got positions in Kenya right now." And I said, "Well, why didn't I know about that?" So I asked her to check up on my application, and I pursued through her some contacts with headquarters and was able to get back in Kenya, of all places. Now, you're not guaranteed at all where the Peace Corps will offer you a position. But I did indicate an interest in East Africa, and they had positions in East Africa, so I was able to go there.
Let's give, when Tom was here, Afghanistan has had so much publicity in this country, people generally know where it is. I'm talking about northeastern Africa?
No, well, Eastern Africa on the Indian Ocean. Kenya is a coastal nation. It is right on the equator. It is south of...
So that means it's warm.
Well, it could be, but as you might know, the British colonized Kenya because its climate was so attractive. It's a very productive land agriculturally in some areas. So the Kenyan highlands became known as the White Highlands, where the white settlers from Kenya colonized and grew their coffee and their tea and these other things. So if you're on the lowlands near the coast, it's a hot country. If you're up in the highlands, it's not. Mount Kenya extends to something like 17,000 feet, has a permanent glacier on the top. So there's a huge range of topography in Kenya alone, and Africa is kind of like that.
Like Tom Goodyear, is it the people that still, I mean, the country, obviously, it's diverse in terms of geographically speaking, and as someone that's been involved with biology, and you still are in your job with the Corps, that must have fascinated you. But
well, I went on the tour with the college course, of course. It was Ecology of East Africa. But when I got there and I began to notice, not really having gone to watch or look or learn about the people, began to notice the people and how they seemed to be living, and how the country had developed that very rural lifestyle, and yet it was so vibrant. The most conspicuous indication of that, or sign of that, the colors that people wear, so vibrant. You could, and by their behaviors, they were so lively and animated sometimes, and their way of speaking is so animated. They don't have telephones, TVs, radios, so much of that to do their communicating for them. They're verbal people, and so it hooked me. It struck me that I got to go back and learn more about this place and see if there's something I can do to help them and help establish some more ties, some more relationships. And
so it's been 30 years,
30
give or
years,
take, since you've been there.
Almost 30 years.
And I know you've met and talked with Peace Corps volunteers, former volunteers from the whole spectrum of years. Do they still have the same kinds of experiences in terms of how they're affected?
As far as I have learned, yes. It depends on what country you go to, what kind of position you're working in. If you go to an Eastern European country and you're in a city, it's going to be a lot different than going to somewhere in Indonesia or somewhere in Africa and you're out in the rural areas. It's completely different. But some universal things Peace Corps volunteers tend to experience are the hospitality of their host people, The richness of another culture, even though it's not our culture, it can be rich. The sense of community that other people retain, their value for elders, for relatives, for kin, their ethnic group, all these sorts of cultural values they have. So I think everybody that goes in the Peace Corps gains a lot in understanding that. And as Tom said, you look at the United States differently. And there's a thing called culture shock. Reverse culture shock is when you come back. I know when I came back and I got off a plane and got in a taxi and was driving down a road in America and somewhere in the United States, what struck me was I couldn't see any people. All I could see were cars driving around. I could see buildings, highways, and cars. But of course in Africa, people don't have cars. They're out walking around. I say the common people, most people don't have cars. Of course, there's transportation. There are plenty of cars in the city, and buses and other forms of transport. But you learn something about the United States, just how rich we are here. Kenyans always looked at me as though I were rich, and I was earning no more than the Kenyan teaching them. But I knew at the bottom of it they were right, because I have this huge social and economic network that the United States is. And it's the economic infrastructure and all of this base to support me, and they don't.
We have about a minute left. Do you believe that other countries can experience good things about America still by inviting Peace Corps?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's almost always true that a person who goes into the Peace Corps is going to be a well-intentioned, probably well-spoken person, and it's going to reflect well on the United States. And people abroad will learn the best things about America, I think, from Peace Corps volunteers. Now, there are a lot of other groups and organizations that work in the Third World and represent an excellent face to those countries, but this is the American government's face to the Third World on a person-to-person basis, and it works really well.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time. I know it was brief, but we wanted to celebrate the anniversary of something that's truly American.
Well, I appreciate that. Congratulations
Steve Rothy
on your show, too, and thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us on Consider This. You've seen the web address of both the Peace Corps and the Peace Corps Association, the former volunteers. Check it out. Thanks for joining us.
This is an Issues and Information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours.
The 9th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Sunday at 5 p.m.